was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, written in 1776, one of the first American bestsellers, in which Thomas Paine explained by rational principles the reason why these small colonies felt the necessity to separate from the gigantic Kingdom of England and the King of England. He explained their inherent desire for liberty, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he explained it in ways that were understandable to the people, to all the people, not just to the educated upper class. Because the desire for freedom is classless. The desire for freedom adheres in the human mind and in the human soul. Today we face another time of turmoil, of anger, and very, very serious partisan division. This is exactly the time we should consult our history. Look at what we've done best in the past and see if we can't use some of that to help us now. We understand that they created the greatest country in the history of the world, the greatest democracy, a country that has taken more people out of poverty than any other country on earth. They weren't perfect men and women, and neither are we. But a great deal of the reason for America's constant ability to self-improve is because we're able to reason, we're able to talk, we're able to analyze. We are able to apply our God-given common sense. So let's do it. Hello, this is Rudy Giuliani, and I'm back with another episode of Rudy's Common Sense. And I know the last episode was about China and about Iran, and the question was protest or revolution. And we concluded that Iran might well be described as a revolution since it's been going on with the interruption for the pandemic for 5 or 6 years, 190 cities involved, almost every portion of society invested in it, and an awful lot of people killed. The Chinese uprising against the CCP is very, very recent. Not that there haven't been uprisings in the past, but this is a very special one. Just last week was the fire in the Xinjiang province of China, remote from Beijing. Now, I think we showed you on the map. How far away it is, and Urumqi. Not sure I have the right pronunciation, but you'll see it there on the map. Very, very far from Beijing, and within a day and a weekend, protests broke out all over China, and hard to say how many people have been killed, how many people have been arrested, how many people have been injured. You're never going to know that in China. Never, ever, ever, ever. The government sources say about 300. Everybody else is more in the neighborhood of 500 to 600, which would be minor casualties in a CCP that's eliminated 80 million of its own people. This is the most brutal dictatorship in the world. It could be the most homicidal in the history of the world. I've been trying to figure out another authoritarian dictatorship that killed more than 80 million of its own people. We might have had dictatorships that killed other people, but the Chinese killed their own people to destroy Chinese culture and to transform it into Marxist Mao communism, which is what they're on process and on schedule to do, with an announced intention of passing the United States by 2048. And if anything, that's probably now a conservative estimate, particularly since their Navy is now larger than ours. So now there's your background. And you know all about about what has gone on in terms of the protest. To the extent that it's covered here, there is a tremendous affection for China within the Democrat Party in particular. The news media, the establishment media, our universities, and our corporations. Not the least of which has been demonstrated in the most shocking way by Apple denying the protesters the ability to communicate on Apple directly. And we're going to get into that in a moment. But let's first introduce Krysia Lenzo, who's the executive director of Harvard in Tech, and that's the official alumni group for technology and related issues. We couldn't have a better application of technology, Krysia, than this. And explain to us, and then we're going to go back over the history of this, because this does not come in a vacuum. This has been going on between Apple and China for some time. And excuse my expression, but Apple has been China's prostitute for quite some time. So explain what happened.
Certainly. And first off, thank you so much for having me on today. As a native New Yorker, it's such an honor to be with you, Mr. Mayor. But to give a little bit of the background here, as you alluded to, Tim Cook, it's really shocking to imagine the CEO.
Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple,
correct,
which pretends to be an American company.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So it's shocking that the CEO of an American company, the biggest in the world, Tim Cook, is now actively helping the Chinese Communist Party. And that is exactly what he did when he decided to help the government turn down these protesters' efforts to share information. And that's what he did when he turned off the airdrop feature. So maybe your listeners might know, but airdrop is a feature on the Apple iPhone, which allows you to share photographs, information. And in China, this is critical for these protesters who are trying to communicate and trying to congregate to protest the government's efforts to keep them contained in these zero COVID lockdowns, which are incredibly draconian. But Apple knew exactly what they were doing, because China is the only nation to turn off this airdrop function. So initially, people had the unlimited power to share information. Now they only have 10 minutes to do so. And that's really, really difficult for these protesters, because they're no longer able to communicate and get the facts. It's really, really a shame. And Apple knows exactly what they're doing.
Well, I mean, the way it works, we'll just make sure everybody understands. For those of you who have an Apple phone, you probably know how it works. Basically, if it's two Apple phones, you can put them somewhat close to each other. They don't have to be next to each other. And it will automatically drop pictures, text, one to the other. You don't have to press a button. You don't have to ring a number. And more important, it can't be interfered with. Nobody can listen into it. So whereas if the normal communication that might go on, text messaging, let's say, or emailing or conversations, the Chinese government could be listening in on it. Or let's put it this way, the Chinese government is listening in on it. I can tell you that when I was in China twice, I didn't bring my phones. I brought burner phones. And the time that I was in Beijing, even though I was meeting with the head of the Communist Party of Beijing, they completely searched my room and all of my associates. Because we left, I was with former police and FBI officials who were in my security company, and we left little traps for them. And they didn't even care. I mean, they probably could have even done it more carefully and evaded our traps. But I think they wanted us to know, we're watching you. And then they placed a young, very brilliant, but beautiful Chinese girl in our car, and we had to throw her out. I mean, it was clear, we're not like Swalwell and Dianne Feinstein. We don't take nicely to Chinese communist spies. They seem to be very comfortable with them. But the government's all over you all the time. So this Apple airdrop must be a real frustration to them.
100%. And it's no coincidence that China is the only country where Apple has now restricted this unlimited airdrop. There's literally no other country that Tim Cook has these restrictions on. So he's clearly not only thwarting the efforts of the protesters, he's actively helping the government. And this is exactly what some reporters asked him on Capitol Hill, whether or not he supported the CCP. He said nothing. Whether or not he supported the protesters, he said nothing. And whether or not he regretted regrets this airdrop feature restriction. No answer. He has nothing to say about any of those questions. So
this would be a good time for a short break. Once again, we couldn't have a more appropriate topic to talk about and introduce the subject again of Patriot Mobile. Patriot Mobile is the only Christian conservative mobile phone provider, and they've been on the front lines of the battles, domestic and foreign, to preserve American values for a very long time, and are a key contributor to many of those battles that we have won. So they're there fighting for your right of freedom of religion, for your right to defend yourself under the Second Amendment of the Constitution, your right to due process, your right to counsel, all the rights that are under attack by the Biden government as if it were some kind of offshoot of Red China. Well, it'd be wonderful, right, if you would do business with them, right? I mean, at one time, you're going to be getting great mobile service, equal and better than many, the equal of all, and better than some. And that money is going to be used in part to fund the causes that are very close to you, including fighting to save and preserve our way of life. And also, in this time of inflation and economic hardship, they're quite reasonable about, determining plans that can fit your budget, and will work with you on that. And if you're a veteran or a first responder, you will be able to get bonuses and discounts. So go to patriotmobile.com/Rudy. That's patriotmobile.com/Rudy. Or call 972-PATRIOT. That's patriotmobile.com/Rudy. 972-PATRIOT. patriotmobile.com/Rudy. Thank you for returning. Well, it is not without, it's not much of a stretch of logical interpretation to say he's getting people killed.
It's not a stretch at all.
I mean, people are being killed in the streets. People are being taken in and tortured. And people are being arrested. This communication, to some extent, is also used to warn each other about the possibility of being detected, taken in. The police are coming near me. We better move to another area. It's used for a lot of reasons, to organize the protests and to give people some degree of safety while they're protesting. Well, he's just ripped that away from them. The whole world is watching this. You couldn't have picked an unbelievably worse example. This is the worst government in the world. There isn't a competitor to China. Iran would be its little brother or sister. Iran loves to kill its own people also, but it's not anywhere near 60 to 80 million. And Iran is a much more diverse country, meaning many, many different nationalities who are very unhappy with the leadership. I just did a podcast on Iran, and I would not be surprised that we're going to have a day pretty soon when we get surprised that the Ayatollah is overthrown. The idea that he's ensconced there as effectively as Z is just not true. And the Iranian people are much further along toward liberation. But in any event, as a human being, it's hard to conceive how you'd approve this. These people are crying out for help. What they're doing is clearly justified. I mean, they get tortured, they get wiped out. The Uyghur people are slated for genocide. The Falun Gong is used to take organs and sell them on the black market. The Christians are killed whenever they feel like doing it. And these people have this method of communication that's a lifeline for them. And this man, American, cuts it off. Can you fathom what must go through his mind to let him do that?
I can fathom it because he has actually come out with statements. There are interviews of Tim Cook speaking, I think, a few years ago, 2017, and he says that China has done an amazing job lifting up people out of poverty. Those are his words, basically, to that effect. And the fact that they've done also an incredible job with their environment. And just a year ago, when pressed by, I think it was Andrew Ross Sorkin on CNBC, going in depth about Tim Cook and the company more generally about the criticisms on China, he said he kind of evaded the question as these CEOs of the tech companies tend to do, but he said that we need to, in order to keep the peace, it's very important to have global trade. And that was his excuse for having relations with the CCP in terms of supporting them, having manufacturing over there, and also doing literally nothing as to the human rights abuses that you just spoke about just now. So it isn't surprising because he has rhetoric and he hasn't really come forward with anything but support of China. And certainly free speech is also a problem when it comes to Apple. They are not a proponent of free speech in the slightest.
Yeah, I mean, people. I don't think people realize. I have to tell you the truth. Until this happened, I didn't bother to do this research. I didn't realize how tied in he is with the Chinese Communist government. First of all, Apple itself buys direct products from companies that they know are clearly engaged in slave labor, including enforced labor of Uyghurs and other persecuted minorities. In fact, they do a significant amount of business and therefore helps to boost their profit from slave labor. Now, this is a guy who supports Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about Tim Cook. So as a matter of social justice, he supports Black Lives Matter. But then he takes advantage of slave labor, of people who, if they don't work hard enough, get killed or tortured. Second, the Black Lives Matter that he supports, and maybe this comes full circle, of course, is an organization that exists for several purposes, all of which are anti-American. One is to eliminate police officers. Every single rally they have, pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon, is an encouragement to kill police officers. They had massive riots in 2020, and they succeeded. We've had record killings of police officers in the last 2 years. There's no question that Black Lives Matter has had a big impact on that. And some of their chief advisors are former convicted police killers who were let out by Democratic, emphasize, presidents like Bill Clinton, just so that they could help train more police killers. So he supports Black Lives Matter for social justice, which is not social justice, it's murdering police officers. It's also a Marxist organization. The people who run it were trained by Chinese and Russian communists. So maybe there's an affinity for communism as well. He has no problem with it. I mean, he also did a deal, when was it, in 2016, 17, 18? He paid them at least $275 million. He got a tremendous amount of concessions from the government. And then he made, and no one knows exactly how much, significant investments in Chinese businesses in order to help our enemy, I guess, hasten that schedule of overtaking the United States. What kind of an American is he?
He's not one. Just in name only, he's a United States citizen. And as you said, but for Apple being domiciled in the United States, his company should not be considered a company that upholds American values. When it comes to freedom of speech, just to even talk about the App Store a little bit, there's been so much controversy as to the apps that have been deplatformed on Apple's App Store, thanks to Tim Cook and his disciples, who essentially believes free speech. If we look at companies like Parler and even newer companies who have are promoting freedom of speech, he's removed them because of their moderation, and even for coming out against Wuhan, coming out against the lab leak theory. The people who have certain free speech apps that are trying to list them on the Apple Store have to specifically remove certain search terms in order to even be listed. So Apple is it's not an not an oligopoly. Yes, there's Google, the Samsung phone, there's the Google phone. It is a monopoly. I mean, we all have our Apple phone. Unfortunately, it's because we're forced to. There's no other competitor out there. Yes, Elon Musk might come forward and say that he's going to try to make a Tesla phone, but to think about that, it's kind of laughable, right? Like it's
Yeah.
exactly laughable.
Yeah.
We can't even imagine a life without Apple, and that's why he has so much power and is able to promote these radical communist policies that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, he has since the time that he made that deal and gave them 275 million and purchased an unknown number of Chinese companies, possibly some even in the defense industry. And many, many Chinese companies that we think of as benign are run by the Chinese military. For example, the Wuhan Virology Lab is a military institution. We never describe it that way because we have a media that also is complicit and I think infiltrated by China. But the Wuhan Virology Laboratory is a military-run institution, as are most of the businesses. And he's a big investor in it. And at the time, he also did a massive purge of Apple. For example, he took off all Bible apps, all religious apps, all Islamic apps, removed them all. The Islamic apps or the Christian apps or the Jewish apps that you could get in other countries are not available in China because maybe they might believe in God and that might interfere with their being dominated by the communists. He's taken off any app they found to be a book that might suggest that there's something wrong with China will not be available on any of the Apple apps in China. So it's a completely censored Apple product. Now, I'm sure they do it elsewhere as well, but in China, they do it to a fairly well because China is a completely restricted society, and they provide a phone device that is in terms of free speech, a joke. It's speech allowed by the Communist Party as much as they can restrict it. And this airdrop was a constant frustration to them because they can't get into it. And they get into everything. So not getting into that, this was a big victory for China. This would be a good time for a short break. Not long ago, Mike Lindell, the inventor of MyPillow, and his team fit me for my very own MyPillow. They also introduced me to their wide assortment of other incredible products, like their mattress topper, their sheets, towels, slippers, and more. Sleep is incredibly important to me, and I can assume for all of you. It's time you give MyPillow a try and see for yourself. Listeners have helped build MyPillow into the incredible company it is today, and Mike Lindell wants to give back to all of you. You can get great discounts on MyPillow products by going to mypillow.com right now and seeing each of the specially priced items, including those in the radio listener special square. You're going to see rotational offers up to 66% off on products like their pillows, mattress topper, Giza sheets, but also new products like their slippers, weighted blankets, robes, and waffle blankets. All MyPillow products come with a 60-day money-back guarantee. Enter promo code Rudy for these great specials. That's mypillow.com and use the promo code Rudy. Thank you for returning.
It definitely is. And no one's calling it out really. I mean, besides you and a few others, no one's really covering the story. And that's also part of the problem. I mean, consistently with big tech companies, I mean, your listeners, your viewers know, I mean, these companies have not received any sort of oversight. I mean, finally now with, the initial meetings with some of these tech oligarchs that are occurring, Tim Cook did go to Capitol Hill this past week. And then in the future, we expect some more oversight with the House. But realistically, they've received no oversight. So I'm hoping these questions do come up. I'm hoping Jim Jordan and some others might step forward and really question Tim Cook as to why he decided to turn off this airdrop function and why he has been so supportive of the CCP. I'd be curious to hear an answer because thus far we've heard nothing.
Yeah. Also, he stoutly maintains that they don't use slave labor, although one independent report linked his company to 7 very, very significant suppliers who use slave labor, including Uyghurs who were taken from the concentration camp, and people in which there have been documented beatings and people have been killed. Then he maintained he didn't have slave labor. But then when Congress attempted to pass a bill to create sanctions for people buying from companies that use slave labor, he was heavily lobbied against it. Who would lobby against slave labor? Who?
Someone with a vested interest.
Somebody who takes advantage of slave labor. It's not exactly a altruistic cause to which you devote your life, the preservation and extension of slave labor. Apparently, Tim Cook wants to make sure that nobody can interfere with slave labor in China. This comes from the Tech Transparency Project, who did this report. So I just want people to know this is not, this is all documented stuff. People on Capitol Hill know that the man is a prostitute for China.
Agree. And I don't think that term is, it's exactly correct because he's literally making money off China, and he's put all our values aside to do so. So I think he is literally in bed with China at this point.
Yeah, and the reality is, I guess we shouldn't give anyone the suggestion when we say it that way that we're talking about small amounts of money. I mean, they did buy him for a lot of money, billions and billions and billions of dollars, and of course a market that he sees as an endless market. He looks at the United States and he sees a relatively limited number of people, 340 million, 350 million. And he looks at China and he sees one time 1.6, 1.4, but China is shrinking. And if they keep, killing 50, 60 million a year, they're going to shrink even faster. Also, he's having great difficulties keeping up with production of his product because of the lockdowns. So they are way behind schedule. There's a possibility they're going to be very deficient this holiday season. They are so tied into China that this had to be a deliberate decision. Something like 70% of the iPhones are manufactured in China, and 80% of the profit comes from China. So making that switch to another country, they've tried to switch some to India, but it will take years to do that. So China has them in the palm of their hands.
Right. And I think even from an ideological perspective, though, even if China didn't have this, stronghold over them in terms of manufacturing, as you mentioned, they obviously do. I think it's also just Tim Cook's pathology. I think there's something deeply wrong with this person who is supporting slave labor and who is supporting Black Lives Matter. There is something nefarious about him, and we shouldn't be afraid to call it out. As a CEO of, the biggest company in the world, we should really question his pathology here. This is not good leadership. This is not someone we should respect or look up to.
Well, I think this was really an excellent discussion, Krysia. And I think that one that people just have to focus on. What do you think, let me ask you in conclusion, what do you think the end result of these protests will be? Will China loosen up on the COVID policy to some extent to try to lessen it? Or does this go deeper? Because a lot of the signs you see go much beyond the COVID lockdown. They talk about getting rid of Xi, getting rid of the Communist Party. They talk about Xi being a tyrant. They actually carry American flags and American symbols. I mean, they're going right in his face and asking to be killed.
These people, these protesters, my heart is with them because they are so incredibly brave what they're doing. And the fact that a United States company which supports the CCP over protesters who are coming forward and really standing up for their freedoms, it just really makes me so incredibly angry and frustrated. I don't know what's going to happen. I think for me to, wage a guess here would be not the right thing to do. But I think in terms of certainly our role in it as the United States, we have not done enough. And China has, I mean, even in our own government, look to our president. I mean, look what has happened here. I mean, we're also owned by China, so it's no surprise that this is occurring. And my thoughts and prayers are with the protesters right now. And I hope we could do more.
No, Biden has been conspicuously silent, as has his mouthpiece Kirby. In fact, they've been an embarrassment. These people are fighting for universal values that are very much attached to the United States. And for the United States not even to speak up on their behalf is disgraceful. But let's pray for them, and let's realize that they're eventually going to prevail. People eventually prevail against tyranny, no matter how much the odds are against them. It may not be as quick as Iran, but this is a good sign.
I hope so. Yes, for sure.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. And thank you for your work. Thank you for your work.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You know, to many, this astounding interference by Tim Cook and Apple in the deadly protests and riots going on in China, in which the people of China are fighting for their survival and for their freedom. It is without doubt a shock, I am sure, to most decent Americans that an American company and an American is aiding in a very significant way the Chinese communist killers. I think Krysia described well and exactly how this airdrop works, but one more time, just so you get it and why it's so important. There are two things about it that are important. First of all, if you're close enough and you both have an Apple phone, you can just automatically drop messages. You don't have to touch a button. You don't have to press a number. You don't have to remember a number. And it can be a picture. It can be a message. And number two, and maybe even more important, it's the one thing that China can't intercept. So they intercept everything. I don't know. I think they try to take your brainwaves. They certainly have brainwashed an awful lot of people. So in a protest like this, both for forming it up or then when it becomes violent on the part of the Chinese Communist Party and they start coming after people, you see them getting beaten in the street, kicked in the head, shot. They can warn each other and save lives. It's like a lifeline. And Apple and Tim Cook has ripped that lifeline away from them. But this has been coming for quite some time. The reports of Apple being involved in slave labor there have been many of them. And I want you to know these are not figments of our imagination. Here's an article about woke Apple continues to use Chinese slave labor, report shows. It actually could say reports show. It also shows Tim Cook in Congress lobbying against restrictions on slave labor. Who would do that? But a communist or a very, very maladjusted human being. There just isn't a lobby for extending slave labor. There is at Apple. Then I alluded to this, but I wanted to give you a little bit of the details of it. In 2016, Apple made an astonishing 5-year agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, and it put in immediately $275 million in cash. It was, according to all the reports, personally handled, and Cook personally lobbied Chinese officials. Now, do I have to tell you that every Chinese official is corrupt? Or do you know that? Now, China is, I don't know, is it more corrupt than Russia? Does it matter? you can't do business there without paying off the Chinese Communist Party or their relatives, because they take money like the Bidens, who may have adopted it from, through their relatives. That's how the bribes get paid. And he claimed back in 2014 and 15 that they were getting threats against Apple Pay, iCloud, and the App Store. So he did what a lot of people used to do with the mafia. He went and got protection. He got protection from the Chinese Communist government. He paid him $275 million. He agreed to help the Chinese manufacturers develop, this is in the agreement, the most advanced manufacturing technologies and support the training of high-quality Chinese talents. This is in the shadow of Xi Jinping saying he wants to dominate the United States and pass it by 2048. So this American is helping him do that, Tim Cook. And then he went ahead and he made many, many investments in Chinese tech companies. And then also made investments in what are described as a dozen Chinese government causes directed by the Chinese Communist government. And then the deal was extended for another year. And there is reported here that Apple promised to invest many billions of dollars more, including in retail stores, research and development facilities, and renewable energy projects. The initial investment, as I said, was $275 million. During that time, Apple did the bidding of the Chinese communists. They deleted popular Bible apps from the China App Store after being directed to do so by the CCP. All the religious apps were eventually pulled, including a very popular one called Bible App by Olive Tree, and the Quran Majid, which was developed by PDMS. That was ripped out so that no religion would be available to the Chinese people, because in China, religion is considered the enemy of the people. And of course, people are being killed for their religions constantly. So this should not come as a shock. In fact, Yahoo, an unlikely source for this, makes a very, very good case in an article published on December 1st of 2022 that China significantly interfered in the election to boost Democrats. And it talks about specific situations and news items that were run, managed by Media Links TV, which is a registered foreign agent, a Washington-based registered foreign agent of the Chinese Communist government. They used China's Central Television for it. They did a significant amount of criticizing. And of course, the place where they had the most influence is TikTok, which is a completely dominated Chinese communist propaganda machine, and also an attempt to get information from you that can be used for the purposes of expanding the power of the Chinese Communist government and destroying the United States. This is a very bad situation. And there's one last thing that I think we should emphasize about it. The silence of the American press, the silence of the American politicians is overwhelming evidence of just how they've corrupted us. If America is destroyed by this, it'll be because our greed exceeded our decency. Our greed exceeded our patriotism. Our greed exceeded our love of our families. Certainly exceeded the love of our country. Let's not let that happen. Let's fight back. Let's let everyone know about Apple, that it is aiding and assisting the destruction of people seeking freedom against the worst dictatorship that exists in the current world. Possibly the worst dictatorship in the history of the world, that slaughters people as if it's just a tactic. It's not just a tactic. Those lives are created by God. People of China are good people. You can see it. Just like take one last look at the map and see how it's spread already in just a week. One fire. They all knew. Those people died because of Xi's megalomania. It's insanity. Look, as I pointed out in the earlier podcast, look at geographically the section of China affected by it, the most populated and the most successful. There's something here. There's something going on in the hearts and minds of these people. And once this starts to happen, the only way you're going to stop it is by killing them all. Let's hope that doesn't happen. I'd like to thank Krysia Lenzo, the executive director of Harvard and Tech, the official alumni group for technology and related issues, for helping us with this. She did a very, very good job. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd like you to spread the word for me, because a lot of people aren't going to hear this on radio and television and newspapers. Spread the word that Apple is aiding and assisting the Chinese communists in making it easier for them to oppress, torture, and kill their own citizens who merely want the basic rights that come from God. Point to the Apple product when you see it and explain it to people. Explain what they're supporting and what they're helping. This is disgraceful. Disgraceful what Apple is doing, disgraceful what Cook is doing, and disgraceful because of the silence of the Biden administration and so many others. God bless the people of China. God bless the people of Iran. They're one with us now in the pursuit of these God-given rights. And God bless America.